So the new Texas Chainsaw is here, released on Netflix as of February 18th, 2022, and man, has it received quite a bit of backlash. As of today's recording, it has an audience score of 38% on Rotten Tomatoes, and just because I'm part of a couple different horror movie fan Facebook groups, I can see that this movie was not well received. But I'm here today to put your worries at rest and to let you know that the world's kind of just overreacting to this being a not so great horror movie, because let me let you in on a little secret. It's just fine. And before you guys tear my head off in the comments section, just calm the fuck down and let me explain my case. But before we get into that, let's do an obligatory quick recap of the movie for those of you whose time is too valuable to watch the movie. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the name of the newest installment here, as Ol' Leatherface gets the 2018 Halloween treatment, meaning that this movie acts as a direct sequel to the original 1971 film, but it's now 50 years in the future. A group of young teens, two of them supposedly are internet cooks or influencers or something along those lines. Basically hip and rich young people who are using their influence to have other hip and rich young people buy up a bunch of abandoned property in an old ghost town in Harlow, Texas. They're gonna make it a hipster's paradise or something along those lines by installing a Whole Foods, a Trader Joe's, or some other shit like that. And old cats, before you totally dismiss this movie because of the premise so far, just bear with me, we'll get to it. But anyway, in the process of trying to gentrify Harlow, the teens realize it's not totally abandoned. The orphanage is still occupied by the lady who ran it, and she still has one of her boys left with her, Old Mang Leatherface. When the teens stir up trouble over the property, ultimately causing the lady to have a heart attack, this causes an initially tame Leatherface to cut loose and dig up some old habits by giving these Gen Zers a taste of Z Chainsaw. Now, since this is a Texas Chainsaw movie, that's basically all the story you need going into it, and if you want to see how this plays out or how it ends, I suggest you go watch it. Alright, so here we are. How do we process all of this? I mean, I've watched the movie twice so far just to reaffirm my position and that it's just fine, and honestly, by far, it's not the worst Texas Chainsaw movie. So before we get into the meat and the potatoes of all of this, let's take a look at this. Now, full disclaimer, I rarely ever use Rotten Tomatoes. I don't care for the scoring system, and I don't like to tell people not to watch something unless aggressively prompted by such a piece of shit movie. But this is just a quick reference here with a very common website that very many people use. Now let's take a look at this chart here. These are some of my absolute favorite movies of all time that have all been up there long enough to get a substantial score with enough reviews on there. And look at this hot stinking pile of shit, baby! The highest score is obviously the first one because it's a freaking masterpiece, with two close behind, with a percentage basically cut in half, with the 2003 reboot close behind. But everything else has such an abysmal fucking score. Now 2022 is right behind the 2003 reboot, which is basically how I would put my top 4 Texas Chainsaw movies, with all of the others fluctuating which is my favorite depending on what mood I'm in that day. So let's get to the 2022 movie that's called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So now we have to add the to the beginning when referencing the first movie if it wasn't already a mouthful. I hear you older cats, I do. Why do we have to see these shitty Gen Zers run around to be the star role of the film of the new Texas Chainsaw movie? That's not what I want to see. I got you. You're not supposed to. Hear me out and don't dismiss me just because I'm a millennial. And trust me, I had to look all this shit up. Advancements with technology and waves of counterculture has always kind of been a major factor in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so it only makes sense to maintain that idea as we progress into the future. The Hewitt family was one of the families that stayed in their area after being totally deserted as everyone left for a new, fancy, cleaner killing machine somewhere else. They did what they had to survive only with the help of each other. If this is a weird concept to you, go back and watch the first Texas Chainsaw with this in mind. It's basically even mentioned right at the beginning of the movie, and it always seemed like a giant red flag to me about the dangers of progress. These are people of the old ways and absurdly stuck in them. And who are they clashing with this entire time? These damn hip teenagers with their permed hair and reefer smoking. And this was important, especially in 1971, when we had massive waves of counterculture pushing against the old. And so we had a movie at the time that showed direct conflict between that new counterculture and the older, and who was gonna come out on top. And that's basically what happens in this movie, but a little more extreme. These teens burst into this town like they own the place and know what's what. They're shown being shitty and arrogant, and we just don't like them off the bat. I figured this was alright, because we were gonna see them get chainsawed anyway, due to the, movie title and all. Whether these characters were for you or not all depends on where you are in life. Watching horror movies isn't taboo like it was 30, 40, whatever years ago, and we just have a wider audience now, and it's gonna hit different for everyone. Now I hear there's some people out there that say this movie was written poorly, and I have to say, well, I reckon you never seen a chainsaw movie. Since the first one, kinda, and the second one, definitely a stretch, there hasn't been a good story in any Texas Chainsaw movie, and I don't think that's the point of them. I love so many of these movies, but when you get down to it, to the nitty-gritty, they're just haunted house flicks, and that's okay. I like as much backstory or whatever as the next guy, but I just want to see Leatherface do some leatherfacing and rip some shitty teens to shreds, and that's certainly fucking delivered in this movie. I could be wrong, and if I am, please correct me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure this movie had the highest kill count for Leatherface ever, and it was fucking savage. A little too over the top for me, but really excellent, but we'll get into that in a second. I thought this movie was actually written better than probably a couple other handful of chainsaw flicks. At least the next generation, throw me that bone, please. Like I said before, this was given the reboot sequel treatment, making this a direct sequel to the first. Leatherface certainly has a more ominous, loomy look, but he's pretty mild-mannered until his mama dies, and then he goes off the fucking handle. We see a side of Leatherface that I found interesting, but they didn't dwell too hard on it, which in my opinion is the right move. I'm here to see Leatherface be a savage bastard and do the chainsaw thing. So lack of story? Who cares? This is the horror genre. If you're looking for a more deep, in-depth story, go check out a different subgenre or go somewhere else. We're here because the Saw is family. Now let's talk about the kills. Holy shit. If you wanted to see Leatherface go apeshit ballistic, this is the movie for you. Before he even gets to the Saw, this giant dude rips some people to shreds without barely even trying. Leatherface grabs a guy's wrist, breaks it, and uses the broken exposed bone to stab him in the neck till he bleeds out and dies. Like, what the fuck? I just stared in awe in that scene. And then he finally gets the chainsaw and all hell breaks loose. This guy rips through a bus of Gen Zers like nobody's business. I know a lot of people really enjoyed this bit. It was the only part for me that seemed pretty over the top for this kind of movie, even if it was pretty fucking cool. The gore was excellent, and if we had a scoring system, we'd give it 10 out of 10 ghosts or goblins or some shit. So not only has Leatherface gotten the reboot treatment, so is Sally. Being the only survivor of the first film, this is the first time we get to see Sally again since 1971. Unfortunately, not played by the original actress since she passed away, but still does a phenomenal job. Sally's like Jamie Lee from 2018, but it doesn't feel like a total ripoff. She's a badass ranger from Texas who finally's got a chance to meet the one who did her dirty many, many years ago. And guess what? The perfect thing happens to her for this kind of movie. She dies. We don't linger on her and focus on her for no reason other than being a character from the original. She's a useful plot point, and then we move on before it feels too cheap. She even did the crazy Sally laugh, which was pretty cool. Girl Gen Zer that survived a school shooting? Might seem like a woke character to you, but I didn't think it really felt all that too cheap or far off. That's what these kids are dealing with these days, so maybe the character is just not for you. My one main gripe with the movie, which could be corrected if someone has some information for me, you could throw it down in the comments below, maybe I'm just not thinking clearly, but did Leatherface join this orphanage as a grown-ass man? I don't get it. His date of birth is 1947, and TCM was supposed to be in 1973. If my dummy brain can figure out simple math, that makes him about 27, which seems a little weird for me for someone to join an orphanage, but hey, I don't make the rules. I still had a couple more issues with this movie, but it wasn't really enough to hold me back from enjoying it. I mean, like I said before, this is a Texas Chainsaw movie after all. We have to go in with less than higher hopes. We can't really sit around and gripe that the story sucked or the acting was terrible without looking back and reflecting on all of the other previous movies in this franchise. Although I do love them, let's be honest with each other. I thought this was a pretty valiant attempt at a pretty unique idea for this kind of universe, even if it wasn't executed perfectly, unlike most of the cast. Thank you all so much for listening to me rant and watching this video. If you enjoyed this content, let me know in the comments below, and I might do more videos like this. I'm Larry Downs, and we will see you all in the sequel.